Welcome.
Hello there.
Hi.
Thank you there, sir.
Today we're going to talk about drinking water. Does anybody in the room use drinking water?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good. It's good to know.
Thank you, sir.
Do any of you know where your drinking water comes from by chance? Lake Ontario, yep. Most of it does come from Lake Ontario.
A water resort, not far from Lake Ontario.
Like maybe a reservoir or something? Okay, yeah. Some of it could come from reservoirs. We're going to talk a little bit today and give you an overview of just how water gets out of Lake Ontario and comes to everybody's homes, businesses, and everybody else while they get drinking water, and how firefighters maybe could use some water to fight fires and that sort of thing.
Right.
So to do that, we're going to look up at the screen, and I'm going to go through several screens that are going to show you just how that happens. So for those of you who didn't catch it, my name's Ken Noggle. I'm with the Monroe County Water Authority. I also have in audience with us today is Chris King, who is also with the Monroe County Water Authority. Chris is our senior water production engineer, and he is our chief operator for our water treatment plants. So if you don't like the water, you complain to him. I'm just kidding.
I thought to swim in it a lot.
Okay, so who are we? Let's first answer that question. We're with the Monroe County Water Authority. The Monroe County Water Authority is just what you see up here, a not-for-profit, public benefit corporation that reliably provides water of quality, affordable, and water that fosters economic vitality and enhances the quality of life for residents of Monroe County and area communities who request service. That statement was probably produced by lawyers, just telling you that, just to be honest with you. So, we were formed in 1950 through an act of New York State Legislature. We're one of three authorities that right around that same time were formed at that point. 1949, there was the Erie County Water Authority in the Buffalo area that was created. After us, in Syracuse, the Onondaga County Water Authority was created. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Was the legislator at the time there it was created?
Oh boy, you know, that predates me. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a little bit before my time. All right. So we were, like I said, we were created by legislation in 1950. However, we didn't really get our feet going until beginning in 1954, when we obtained customers that we first provided service to in the village of Honeyway Falls. Some other milestones along the way include in 1959, we acquired the assets of a private water company called the New York Water Service Corporation. It wasn't until 1962 that our very first water treatment plant on Lake Ontario was built. And that's the Shoremont Water Treatment Plant, which is not far from where we currently sit in this room right now. About 2-3 miles down the road. All right?
Yes, sir. How far was it from the Oldenbach plant? The Oldenbach.
You could probably throw a baseball from the Oldenbach plant and almost hit the Shoremont plant. It was right next door to one another. So, 1959, if you take a look up at the screen here, what you see here is really the service area for what began as our roots, if you will. The area that you see in blue are areas where customers received our water, and they were what we call retail customers. A retail customer is basically, if you think about owning a house, you get a bill in the mail. That bill came from us. The areas in red are wholesale customers, and the nuances with that is basically we would sell water to, say, in this case, the town of Greece, and then the town of Greece would sell water to members of the town itself. So what you're going to see here is basically an expansion and growth, and we're going to do a little time machine here. We're going to go from 1959 up to the present. We're going to flip through these slides. So again, 1959, the colors change a little bit. Up here at this point, think green is wholesale, blue is retail. 1959 to 1972, we're beginning to expand outside the core area around the city of Rochester. Blue again retail, green wholesale. 1984, from 72 to 84, it doesn't look like a lot changed, but it really did. So you're starting to see some areas fill in. And we're pushing outside of the towns of the inner core of Monroe County. By 1990, we're beginning to provide water on a wholesale basis to areas outside of Monroe County. In this case, going into Ontario County. You've got parts of the town of Victor and so on and so forth. 1994, we're jumping ahead. 1997, begin to really see the area begin to expand. We're more into Wayne County at this point, Ontario County, and now beginning to go into Orleans County. By 2000, we're beginning to supply water over what you see here is into Genesee County at that point. So present day, this is what the system looks like presently. The area in blue is the retail area. We supply water to almost all of Monroe County with the exception of the village of Rockport, village of Hilton. The little yellow you see up there by Irondequoit Bay is the Seabreeze Water District. And then the city of Rochester. The city of Rochester, and you'll see this later on in other slides, has their own public water supply system. So, further along, you can see up here, we're into Orleans County. We've got some retail operations in Kendall. We supplement to the town of Murray, which means basically when they need water for whatever reason, whether they don't have enough capacity, we can supply them some extra water. And then we wholesale into Clarendon. Into Genesee County. Genesee County is sort of a tale of two sides of the county. The eastern part of the county is all retail, and the western part of the county is all retail. The difference here is that we actually purchase water from the Erie County Water Authority for Pembroke and Darien. That water comes from Lake Erie. I should go back a slide. Let's see if I can go back. Okay, so in our present configuration, we supply, these are 2018 statistics that you see down here at the bottom. We supply on average about 58 million gallons per day of water. The population served, if you add up all of our retail customers and the customers within our wholesale areas, accounts for about 750,000 people. There's 185,000 service connections or accounts, 44 booster stations, 49 storage tanks, 2 reservoirs. Who's the gentleman that asked about reservoirs? We have 36,000 valves, 26,400 fire hydrants, and about 3,340 miles of water main. How far can you guys go in 3,340 miles? Any idea?
I'm thinking that 3,000 miles. I believe that might be from...
Near the west coast.
Yes. Probably almost to San Diego, right?
Right.
So that's how many feet of pipe that our staff operates and maintains each and every day.
Yes, sir.
This map that you see up here now is the area shown based upon the service supply. So the important thing to take away here is the area in blue is Lake Ontario water. The area in green is Hemlock water. Hemlock water coming from down in Livingston County, about 30 miles away, and that's produced by the city of Rochester. What are we looking at up here? Can anybody tell me?
The Great Lakes.
Great Lakes.
The Great Lakes, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes, sir.
how many Great Lakes are there?
5?
5.
Can you name them?
Superior, Huron, Michigan, and Erie, and Ontario.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the Great Lakes for a minute, okay? Great Lakes is a series of freshwater lakes, and that's key and important here, that discharge into the Atlantic Ocean in North America. They consist of, you guys named them already, Lake Superior, Huron, Michigan, Ontario, and Erie. Lake St. Clair and the St. Lawrence River are also considered part of that hydrological cycle, or that system, if you will. Collectively, all 5 of those lakes represent 95% of the United States freshwater supply. Of that volume, that's an 84% representation of all the fresh surface water in North America. And if you look at it in terms of from a world perspective, it's 22% of the world's fresh water right here in your own backyard. Total watershed area, this is getting into some statistics here, is about 295,000 square miles. And that watershed area includes parts of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, province of Ontario, Pennsylvania, Quebec, and Wisconsin. Fortunately, in the late 2000s, there was a political compact that was signed into law which basically prevents the withdrawal of that water out of the watershed area itself. What that means is basically nobody could put in a pipeline right now and say pipe it out to Arizona or Nevada where water is much scarce. We're very fortunate to live in this area and have that supply of water available to us. This map here just gives you a geographical representation of the watershed shown around the lakes. So, that's great that there's 5 Great Lakes, but we only really are concerned with one of them, really right now, because that's the one where we're getting our water from. That would be, what's this body of water right here? Who can tell me?
Lake Ontario.
Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario. You guys are good. Thank you, sir. Okay? So, how do we get water out of Lake Ontario and make it available to everybody? Well, we have to pull it out of the lake, and we have to treat it to make it safe for people to drink. All right?
Yes, sir.
And we do that at what are called treatment plants. The Water Authority operates 3 treatment plants right now, 2 on a daily basis, 1 on sort of a part-time basis. Of those 3, 2 of them are treatment plants that take water out of Lake Ontario. The first one we're going to look at is the one up at Shoremont. The one where, anybody recognize that building right there?
Yes, sir.
What is it? The Odenbach plant, where we're going to throw baseballs from, remember?
Yes, sir.
All right, okay. So, the Shoremont Water Treatment Plant was a summation of, if you will, of 3 plants in one. The facility itself consists of treatment processes that were built in 3 phases. The initial phase was constructed in 1962. The expansion phase, the first one, was completed in 1972. And then the most recent phase that was added to the plant was 1982. If you add up the capacity of the plant itself, it can produce up to 140 million gallons of water a day. Process, how does it do it? What does it do? Basically, it takes water out of Lake Ontario. There's a pipe that goes out into the lake, and it goes out about 1.5 miles. And at that location, there is an intake structure that allows water to come into the pipe. And that intake structure is at a depth of water of about 45 to 50 feet deep. This year would probably be closer to 50 feet deep. So water is pulled into a pump station And as it comes in through, it goes through a screening system which prevents large debris from coming into it. We don't want logs, we don't want big things coming in. And then from there, we have big giant pumps that take the water and pump it up over to our treatment plant. As it comes into the treatment plant, we do some things to get the water ready for treatment. And we do that by possibly adjusting the pH of the water. We may add some chemicals to it to start the treatment process and everything else. But the first stop along the treatment process is where we begin to add a chemical called aluminum sulfate to the water. And what that does is it makes the water, or the debris and dirt particles that are naturally occurring in the lake, and it makes those small particles come together. Does anybody ever play with magnets?
Yeah.
Okay? What happens if you take a magnet that has a minus charge and a minus charge and try to push them
It
together?
doesn't connect, it kind of like it pushes it
Yeah,
away.
it pushes away, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. But what happens if you take that same magnet and flip it around and take a minus and a plus?
They attract each
Connects
other.
together, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So those chemicals that I talked about do just that. It makes those small particles want to come together and make big particles. And we want the big particles because those big particles settle by gravity much easier and much faster. They help the filtering process. So that's what we're doing at these two steps that you see right here. We're getting the water ready for filtering, all right? So after it goes through that process, it goes to our filters. Yes, sir, man,
How much
question.
do the pipes weigh?
Oh, a lot of them are heavy, like the ones down here.
Yes,
These
sir.
are either 72 inches in diameter or 78 inches in diameter. And some of them are made out of concrete, some of them are made out of steel, some of them are made out of ductile iron. There's a whole slew of different type of pipe materials, and they get big and they get heavy.
Okay,
So,
because
going back to
we're
what the
gonna
water
keep
does
it
in the plant, it goes through filters, okay? And those
Yes, sir.
filters take the dirty particles and get it out of the water, because we don't want you drinking water with dirty particles in it.
Yeah.
Right. No, sir.
After it gets filtered, it gets disinfected. And we use chlorine to disinfect the water, because we don't want germs in the water. Germs would make people sick, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we disinfect the water, and then at the end, we add a little bit of a chemical called fluoride to the water for dental health. The water then goes into what's called a clear well. And think of the clear well as just a big giant swimming pool where the water sits in there until we pump it out of the clear well and move it out to the distribution system. So the next few slides that you're going to see are just some cutaways of each of those processes along the way. Again, here is the intake for Shoremat, showing you kind of just a very graphically pleasing view of it. This view here is our rapid mix area where we mix up the water and get those chemicals starting in the treatment process. This view here shows a contact basin where the water is allowed to move from one side of the basin to the other side where those small particles come together to make the big particles. And then over to our filters. And then lastly to the clear well that we just got done talking about, all right? Inside the clear well, there's these things that look like curtains. And all those curtains do is make the water move around them and make them travel through the clear well. And that way we get good mixing in the clear well and we keep water from getting stagnant. The last thing we have to do periodically is those filters, once all the dirt and debris settles on top of the filters, we have to clean them. Does anyone like to clean their room?
Yeah.
Who likes to clean the room, right? But you got to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. We have to clean our filters, okay? We have to, just like you guys cleaning rooms, we have to clean our filters and get the trash out. And we do that every once in a while, depending on how much dirt and debris is in the water from the lake, will dictate how long and how often we have to clean our room, okay?
Yes, sir.
After we do that by a process called backwashing. And what happens there is we push water back up through the bottom of the filters, and that water comes up and lifts the dirt particles up where we can remove them and return it back out to a treatment process, if you will, that allows the dirt to settle and the clearer water to return back to Lake Ontario.
Just like when you backflush your filter for your pool.
Exactly. Look at you, you're good.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's the Shoremont treatment plant. I mentioned we had another treatment plant for Lake Ontario. 2013, we built a new plant out in Webster. Call it the Webster Water Treatment Plant. Make sense? Okay? The Webster Water Treatment Plant has been, or had been, a part of our long-term plan. Oh, you have
I
questions?
see Basket Road.
I'm sorry?
I see Basket Road.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the Webster Water Treatment Plant had been in our long-term strategic planning for, quite frankly, many decades. It took us a while to get there, and, well, in 2013, we built it. Okay? This statement, or this slide up here kind of hints at how long the Webster plant had been in our planning phase. If you look up here in that green circle, it shows a concept for a treatment plant up in the town of Webster on the eastern side of Monroe County. And that's in 1963. So when we designed and built the Webster Water Treatment Plant, we said basically, what are we going to do for treatment processes? We looked at Shoremont and we said, hey, that looks good, it's working for us. Let's basically recreate what we're doing at Shoremont, and we'll do the same thing at Webster. Draws out of Lake Ontario, similar water and everything else, and that's basically what we did. The difference between the two plants really has to do with how we're getting water into the Webster plant. We took a little bit different approach for constructing the intake. In this particular case, we actually dug a hole down in the earth and took a tunnel boring machine, and we dug, the tunnel boring machine drilled a hole underneath Lake Ontario in bedrock, and then we popped up with an intake structure. Wow. So there's no pipe that lays on the bottom of Lake Ontario like what you see at Shoremont. Graphically, or I guess this view would show you basically that concept, that design. So the tunnel itself is not quite as far out as the intake for Shoremont. It's a little bit less than 1.5 miles. But the diameter, or the size of the intake is a bit bigger. It's 9 feet in diameter, so you can almost drive a car through it, right? 9 feet in diameter. So what happens is water comes into the tunnel, goes through the intake crib, and flows over to this structure here where we have pumps and screens, and we take the water out of that location and pump it up to the plant. One of the main differences between the two plants is how we mix our coagulants, our aluminum sulfate. Remember the aluminum sulfate's in there to make the small particles clump together? The Webster plant doesn't have a mixer that spins around like a giant fan. It has something called a static mixer, and as water flows through the static mixer, it hits these fins, which makes turbulence, which causes the mixing action in the chamber itself. The big benefit to this is we don't have to run motors that turn the water around. So it's a little bit more energy conscious, if you will. But basically the same treatment process are in play. Yes, sir.
Do you currently have any plans to replace the motor mixer at the old plant with a static mixer, like at the new plant?
That's a very good question. It's something that we've looked at and considered, and I could foresee at some point in the future that happening. The problem with old technology or old infrastructure is always retrofitting it to be able to kind of put things in the way you want them. Yes,
You
ma'am?
guys do like water filters?
Do we do water filters?
Yeah, like when you have a faucet, you'll do water filters to get rid of
So
chemicals.
we filter the water at the plant to begin with, okay? So the water is filtered to start with before it gets to your house. Once, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll hint at it now, but once the water comes into your house through the basement and after your meter, it really is the customer's responsibility for how they use water in that particular way. So if customers decide that they want to put a filter on their faucet, they're free to do so. We don't endorse it, nor do we frown upon the practice. What I would say is all of our water, and we'll talk about testing in just a minute, currently meets all state and federal water quality standards. So the additional treatment in a house is really an unnecessary step in our view. And in fact, what can happen is some of that equipment, if it's not being maintained right, can cause a detriment to water quality and actually cause impairment to it. Yes, sir.
I got a question. How much would it cost for the pipe thing to be replaced? Like the older ones, like.
So we have a program, or we have many programs that get into ongoing maintenance of all of our infrastructure. And we have programs in place to replace water mains. We have programs in place that clean and rehabilitate water mains. We even have long-term planning that looks at the overall life cycle of all of our infrastructure and plans for its inevitable replacement. So everything that you see in terms of the water system has a useful life to it. We do our best to maintain it and extend it as long as we can, but inevitably, at some point in the future, everything has to be replaced. Yes?
Do you have problems with the zebra mussels?
Do what?
Do you have problems with the zebra mussels?
We have, yes. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is we do things to try to minimize their disturbance of our operations. We'll put chemicals, we'll use chlorine and inject it out at the intake to minimize their population growth. We'll use potassium permanganate, another chemical that helps in that process. So we do things to try to prevent them, but they do come in. Ultimately, we have divers that we send out to the intakes that actually mechanically scrape them off and clean them off. Yes?
You don't use the water tower on 250, the old water tower in town of Webster?
Yes, there were two on that site, right? Are you
Yeah.
referring to those?
Yeah.
So one of the two just got recently painted,
Okay.
and the second one just got recently removed. So it's no longer there. So two became one, and one's left.
All right, and was that a Monroe County one, or was that when Webster used to use the water?
So that's a good question. If you look at, if you think back to the mapping and how we got all that blue, we have grown as a water system both organically and inorganically. We have assumed the operations of other public water systems, and Webster is one of those water systems where we have assumed the operations of their infrastructure, and we operate and maintain that moving forward.
My wife and I moved out there in 2003, we were very happy that you guys took over the water, because the water was hard, easy to
Yeah.
get water heaters and.
Yeah, the village of Webster was a groundwater supply, and like you just said, there were issues with the aquifer itself. It was high in iron, high in other things, and was very problematic for the treatment systems that they had at that plant. Really needed more robust treatment, and when you talk about needing more robust treatment, it gets expensive. And who pays for it? Well, it's the ratepayers, the customers of the water system. So the decision was made by the village of Webster to say, basically, what is our best alternative here for our customers? And it was let's let the water authority take over operation.
All right.
Yes. Yeah.
If you do use the water filter,
Yep.
how often do you
So that question's best answered if you read the manual that comes with your filters. That'll talk about the life or how often they should be replaced. A lot of times it's based on time used or how much water is filtered through. So the volume and or time will dictate that. So let's just finish up on Webster really quick here, the newer plant that's in Webster. This is a cutaway of the filters that you see here. All of our filters, in this case, Webster has 6 filters, Shoremont has 16. All of our filters are dual media filters. They consist of a layer of sand with a layer of either granular activated carbon or anthracite on top of it. Just like Shoremont, there's a clear well at Webster, does pretty much the exact same thing. In this case, the clear well here at Webster is 4 million gallons. Shoremont's is right around 3 million gallons. And just like at Shoremont, we have to clean our room here at Webster too, so we clean our filters going through a backwash process. Okay, so we talked about the Lake Ontario supply, and earlier in the slides I mentioned we get some water from Hemlock Lake. Well, Hemlock Lake has a water treatment plant that has pretty much the exact same treatment methods with some slight variations as what we have for Shoremont and for Webster. The difference is it's operated and maintained by staff in the city of Rochester. They have a filter plant. Yes, ma'am.
My dad, when he was alive, used to live near Hemlock and Kennebec Lake.
Oh, okay, yeah. Did you like it down there?
Yeah, that's it. I lived there till 13.
Okay, yep. Yep.
My great aunt, before she died and before she moved back here, she used to live in Hemlock years ago. My grandpa's sister,
Yeah.
but she just passed away a couple years ago.
Beautiful area down there, isn't
I
it?
know, yes, sir.
Filtration plant. They have the ability to produce up to 48 million gallons per day down there at that plant. So basically the big difference between the two supplies is the water coming from the Hemlock plant is gravity fed most of the way. And when I say most of the way, they do have, the city, they do have to pump the water out of the lake to get it up and into the plant. And then from there, it's all gravity fed coming from Hemlock up to the city of Rochester. It stops off at a couple of reservoirs along the way. And along the way, we have the ability, through an agreement with the city of Rochester, that allows us to obtain a certain amount of water from those conduits and provide it to our customers. And we do that primarily for customers here in Monroe County. It would be in Mendon, Honeoye Falls, Rush, coming up into Henrietta, parts of Pittsford, parts of Brighton. The plant was constructed in 1993, and as part of our arrangement with the city, the Water Authority paid for 54% of the construction costs of that plant. That plant was built in 1993. However, the city of Rochester has been using Hemlock Lake as a source of drinking water for its residents since 1876. So it's been in use as a drinking water supply for quite some time. Yep.
I have a question. How long does it usually take to fix a water main break?
Hopefully less than 4 hours. Hopefully. We try to get it done as quick as possible. But unfortunately, sometimes we have to find the leak, we have to isolate it, then we have to dig it up, and then we have to make the repairs. And then that's a sloppy, dirty process sometimes, and we're trying to get the water fixed as quick as possible because it could mean an interruption to, say, your house.
How much would it cost to do that?
It depends on the size of the water main break. It depends on how much the repair is needed, whether we can just put a little clamp on it and make it go away, or if we have to cut the pipe out. So, going back to a little bit on the city's supply, Hemlock Lake, Canadice Lake, this is basically the plant and the conduit system coming up into the city of Rochester. The city does have the ability to switch sources from Hemlock Lake to Canadice Lake if they need to for various reasons. That water sharing agreement that I mentioned earlier also includes a provision that allows the city to take water from the Water Authority. And they do that at the Mount Reed Booster Station up here in Greece, and that water is supplied to the city for their customers, mainly in the northern, western part of the city.
What about the one down in Cobb's Hill? Cobb's Hill has water in it too.
Cobb's Hill?
Yeah, they got water in there too.
Yep. So that reservoir up on the top of the hill, not that little, looks like a little pond down at the bottom, but up on top of the hill, there's a big reservoir up there. That holds about 144 million gallons of water. That's water that came from Hemlock Lake, and that's water that's going into the city system for their customers.
Yeah. How can you tell us your water is clean?
How can we tell?
Yeah.
So along the way, when you saw the plants, right? We
Yeah.
talked about going through all these processes. We have to collect samples of the water and test it for various things. And those tests tell us information in terms of whether the water is safe for drinking or not. Those tests also help us to make treatment adjustments as well. So some of the things we're testing for are there just to assure us that we're making the right decisions in the treatment process, and others are there to show or demonstrate that the water is truly safe. We literally do thousands of samples a week, a month, you name it. There's things that we continuously monitor for. We're collecting data. We have instruments and meters that collect all sorts of data that are continuous. Some of it's done on an hourly basis, some every 4 hours, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. All of that water quality testing is dictated by what's called the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act and the New York State Public Health Law. So to assure that we're meeting those water quality standards, we have to collect all that data and we have to provide it to regulators who look at the data and say, yeah, you're in compliance with the standards or not.
Yeah, watch out for lead too.
Lead is one of those contaminants that we do have to do certain monitoring things for.
Wow.
We last had to do it in 2018, and we'll next do it again in 2021. So what you just saw up there, I flashed through it really quickly. I'm not going to get into too great a detail, is the one small water treatment plant that we operate periodically. It's called the Corfu Water Treatment Plant. It's a groundwater plant out in Genesee County. It has 2 wells in it that we operate sort of on an as-needed basis. It helps us with blending with Erie County Water Authority water for various reasons that we look to do. What you see up here are just examples of different types of pump stations that we have out in our distribution system. So we take water out of Lake Ontario, put it through the plants, but then to get it to areas of our distribution system and our customers who are all over the place, we have to have things like pump stations, which pump the water all around. I mentioned the city of Rochester, which is all gravity fed. They don't have to do a lot of pumping. We have to do a lot of pumping. It gets expensive and it gets very energy intensive, if you will. So we're constantly paying attention to things like energy rates, what we pay for it, and how our pumps are performing, the efficiencies of those pumps. Those are all things that we have to be cognizant of in order to make sure that we're keeping our rates down as best as possible. Yes, sir.
Do you have an estimate of what percentage of the energy used in the pump stations come from renewable energy sources?
So we purchase all of our energy primarily from either Rochester Gas and Electric or New York State or
National Grid?
National Grid would be the other one. And maybe Chris might want to chime in on that one a little bit better than I can, but what I think the answer is we purchase the energy from those providers and we leave it up to them in terms of how they're obtaining the energy itself.
Yeah, in this area, a substantial amount of electricity is produced at Niagara Falls. So I've heard maybe roughly a quarter of the energy used here might be renewable, if you consider the hydroelectric at Niagara Falls renewable.
Wow.
So in this photo here, you see different sizes of pumps, from small pumps that are 5 horsepower and can pump about 100 gallons per minute, to some very large ones, which are 1,750 horsepower and can produce or pump water at 1,500 gallons per minute.
Wow.
Believe it or not, the most expensive thing to operate those pumps is actually turning them on, not actually running them.
Wow.
So pumps pump water to storage tanks. We like to move water from one location to the other, and then we put it in storage tanks. From the storage tanks going out into the distribution system, it's primarily gravity fed from there. Yes, sir.
Well, why is turning the large pipes on the most expensive aspect of operating them?
Because they exert a spike in demand. When you turn those pumps on, they exhibit a big energy draw. Does that make sense?
Oh, it's similar to how when you turn a light bulb on, there's a spike in demand.
Yeah, if you were to watch a meter, when you turn things on, there's always a spike to it, and then you get the usage is a lot cheaper. Yes, ma'am.
In the large communities, pipes coming free, essentially. Are all the pipes metal? Are there metal pipes, or are they all?
So our distribution
Do I have to
system
worry about
is,
the pipes
yep,
in that direction?
yep. So our distribution system is made up of pipes that are all sorts of different age and materials and sizes, okay? We have some areas of our distribution system that are over 100 years old. We have other areas where new developments are occurring. There could have been pipes put into service today, for all I know. So that all predicates on the age is going to dictate, in most cases, the materials that were used. Those older pipes, in a lot of cases, they're going to be cast iron pipes, or looking at the city's conduits, the original construction for those were brick-lined conduits, basically themselves. So we have, like I said, different ages and different materials. So there's cast iron, ductile iron, there are plastic pipes in some cases, concrete pipes, we have asbestos cement lined pipes, steel riveted pipes. Again, it's a culmination of all different types of materials.
What's the difference between the elevated storage pump?
So the elevated storage tank, if you think of this as the volume of water here, it's just up on a pedestal, pushed up that much higher. Versus ground level tanks, all that water is basically at the surface of the ground.
Oh, okay.
The higher you push the water up, the better your pressures are in the system. In this case, we do operate 2 reservoirs. The authority does. We have one in Pittsburgh called the Denise Reservoir. It's 55 million gallons, and then one in Mendon called the Parish Road Reservoir. It's a little bit smaller. Now, if you look at our service area, and it kind of looks like Monopoly pieces up here on the board here. Right? So those green things and those things that look like Monopoly houses are all either pump stations or storage tanks. And overall, what you see here, where this looks like different colors, are what we would consider or call different pressure zones. This is how when we're pumping water around in those particular regions, a storage tank feeds an area of the distribution system that has pretty equal pressures to it. Most of our pressure zones have multiple storage tanks to them for redundancy purposes. Not all of them do. Someday maybe we hope to get to that point, but we'll see. Probably not in either of our lifetime, right? Yes, ma'am.
Getting back to Elmont,
Mhm.
how much higher is the elevation there?
They're about 975 feet above sea level. Lake Ontario is about 245 feet above sea level. So there's your difference overall. If they draw water out of Canadice Lake, Canadice is even at a little bit higher elevation. And that's about 1050 to almost 1100 feet above sea level. Yep, yep. They have valves on them. They can valve things off and they can stop the flow of water, or they can control the flow of water. But yes, they always have water in them unless they break. So they have call it a watershed protection program. Going back about 10 years ago, the city maintained and owned most of the watershed around the lake. Then, right around 2008, 2009, they entered into an agreement with New York State to sell the watershed to New York State. New York State created basically a state park for that watershed. To answer your question, they do allow boating on the lakes, but there is a engine size restriction, and I think it's 9 horsepower, or the maximum is 10 horsepower. They've got to be below 10 horsepower, so it's 9 horsepower. So you can put a boat in it.
Well, I think you talked about that, it's not gonna, that might not happen in our lifetime, why is that? It's not gonna happen ours.
Well, what I'm referring to there is, while things are ideal, they don't always come to fruition from the standpoint that we have priorities that need to be assessed and looked at on a continuous basis. If for a reason that came up that we decided that the priority needed to be to provide redundant tanks in all of our zones, then we could do that. But that's not something that's necessarily driven by a necessity per se, more than a desire to improve the hydraulics of those pressure zones. We can accomplish the management and operation of those zones in other means that doesn't necessarily require the addition of a redundant storage tank in those zones. So customers really are not being impacted in a negative way. Make sense? So basically, that map earlier is all about this slide here, where if you look at the cutaway here, you have a water main pipe in the ground out at the street. So how does water get into your house? Well, first there's a connection to the water main, and then there's a valve, call that a curb stop, where that's operated, open and closed. And then from there, you have a small diameter pipe that goes into the basement of a typical house, goes through a meter, and after that meter, it then goes to, well, a hot water heater, washer and dryer, up to a kitchen, and up to bathrooms. That's as complex as it gets. Well, it's more complex than that, but that's as easily as it gets. So, you guys asked about water quality. I think I heard some questions, or I'm making them up in my mind. But in any event, what I have over here, that board right there, is a cutaway of our annual water quality report. We're required by law to provide data to all of our customers on all the water quality testing that occurs on an annual basis. Yes, sir.
Are there minimal standards you have to meet every year, and can
Yes.
you get them online, these quality reports?
Yep, yes and yes. All the above. I actually brought copies of the annual water quality report. The first pile to the left of papers that you see there is the full annual water quality report. Now, the data reported is the data of detected substances, if you will. That doesn't mean that there is an issue with water quality. Those are just parameters that we have data for. The full amount of data, all the testing that we do, is summarized on our website, and customers can get that at any point in time. Yep.
I'm wondering, what would be a dangerous amount of fluoride? I mean, I don't mean to say anything bad about there being fluoride in the water. I'm just wondering because...
So fluoride is one of the chemicals where there's a maximum contaminant level to it. In New York State, that level is 2.2 milligrams per liter. We augment our naturally occurring fluoride levels in the lake. Naturally occurring being that water that comes out of Lake Ontario has fluoride in it to begin with, and it's typically right around a 0.1 to a 0.2 level, and we raise that level to a 0.7 is the targeted range, and that's based upon the Centers for Disease Control's recommendations for fluoridation of public water systems. The national maximum contaminant level for fluoride is 4.4. So in New York State, we're half that level.
How about rainwater? You know, like the water we get from there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you want
If you wanted to use rainwater at your house, you're talking about?
When the rain, you said, I get water for you, just drink water. Is that
Well, I wouldn't recommend it because you may have bacteria and viruses in the water that...
I mean, from the rain comes from above? I mean, what, rain?
Sure, yeah. Atmospheric deposition that goes down through, there's dust, debris, there's things that get transported around. Absolutely.
I did have another question.
Yeah.
Talking about 1870, what did they do for 1870? For the grandparents and great-grandparents, what did they do for, they had wells and stuff, right?
They did, right. So what this presentation doesn't focus on is the advancements of water treatment and the reduction of illnesses such as cholera outbreaks, typhoid outbreaks, and other water quality illnesses that basically the practice of treating drinking water and disinfecting it have all but eliminated in many cases, at least here in the United States and in Europe, the more developed areas. There are still areas of the world where water, number one, is scarce, and water, number two, has a lot of naturally occurring high contaminants of various things. India is an example where a lot of the groundwater in India has very high arsenic levels. So, yeah.
So going back to our grandparents, I mean, you know, they probably only had well water here, and
Mhm.
they probably had that boil electric, right? So you wouldn't have, I mean, they had
Yeah.
I'm sure what the procedure was. I thought water was the water,
Right. The incidence or the rate of illness events was much higher back then. Did they survive it? Yeah, in many cases. Right. But if you also look at the overall life expectancy, people today have a much longer life expectancy than people who lived 100, 150 years ago did. Yes?
My father had a well and they put sulfur in the water.
And what did you put in it? It had sulfur in it? Kind of like a rotten egg smell? Yeah. Yep. Some groundwater has high sulfur levels in it, and it creates that rotten egg smell in it. Yep.
Even in Africa, people can get sick from drinking the water there.
Absolutely.
My church did a drive where they cleaned the water there.
Yep. It's an issue of two things, quantity and quality. So you want to have that mix of both quantity and quality. You can have the quantity without the quality, and sometimes you can have the quality without the quantity. You're best served by having adequate supplies of both of that. Yep.
Well, how much water is pumped into your house every day?
So generally, if you were to design a house and build a house today, you look at about 110 gallons per day per capita. So if it's a 4-person household, you're looking at about 440 gallons per day.
So it's a little different than living in an apartment.
Yep. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if the water comes out brown, is that necessarily a sign that dirt got in the water?
Necessarily, no. It could be other sources. It could be rust could create that appearance as well.
It could be like,
You could have
Sometimes if
galvanized
they do
piping that,
construction.
as it corrodes over time, will impart a discoloration to the water. So, yeah, discoloration doesn't necessarily mean it's one thing over the other. You don't necessarily know. It could be a leak and where there's things getting into the water that way, or it's corrosion, or
Or
it's
like
another
you
thing.
do construction, like if they, a lot of people, they inform us like if they're doing construction, work out, and sometimes they might hit a pipe and
Mhm.
that might cause a,
Yeah, we don't want them doing that, by the way.
right,
Yeah.
and sometimes it happens and that's why
Yeah.
they always tell us that you'll see the water colored because of the pipe.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions. I didn't realize it was such a big operation. How many people do you employ?
We have, as of the end of 2018, it was 211 people.
That's not many people. And what happens?
It's less people today than it has been. Yeah, as technology's evolved, we've leveraged improvements in technology, computer systems, so on and so forth, to take advantage of letting those systems do some of the work that other people used to do.
Now, you told us about how the water gets to our house. What happens to the water that leaves our house?
So if you are located in Monroe County, most areas of Monroe County, you may be served by a sanitary sewer. So the water, after it goes down your kitchen sink or down your bathtub drain or you flush the toilet, goes down and is collected into a pipe. That pipe collects the water and material and takes it to a wastewater treatment plant.
Like
There's a
Van
very
Laar?
large one located in the town of Irondequoit called the Van Laar Water Treatment Plant.
That's the waste treatment plant.
They treat the water and return it back to the lake.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep. Yes. At the where? At the beaches? Well, most of that water isn't cleaned by something at the beach. It's the environmentally, naturally occurring water, if you will. Now, there can be times when there are some things in the water at the beach that can cause you harm and everything else. Certain beaches do get tested in terms of water quality, and in some instances, the municipality that operates the beach may be asked to close the beach because of that water quality, because of testing.
They always do like
Ontario Beach and, yeah, Durand Eastman Beach. Yep.
I'm wondering, how likely are the people you employ, how likely are they to be replaced by automation in the future? I'm just wondering.
Oh, that's a question that probably is tough to answer because you don't know where technology is going in the future right now. If you go back 15, 20 years ago, you might not be holding that device in your hand right now. You might be holding a camcorder or some other means of a recording device. Could you have predicted that? Probably not.
I did a job that was replaced by a robot.
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
When people flush their medications down the toilet, is that like
Well, so if your house is served by a sanitary sewer and you're flushing those compounds down the toilet that way, they're making their way ultimately back to Lake Ontario unless the wastewater treatment plant has systems in its facility that are able to remove those compounds.
It's been, they've been for a while that said, don't do this, and there's a safe drop off here, people have been doing that in the past.
Whereas public water systems are constantly under the pressure, if you will, to be maintaining water quality. And as science evolves, as technology evolves, then we learn new things. We learn new emerging contaminants of concern that water systems a few years ago maybe didn't have to consider in their treatment processes, but that regulations are going to begin to pick up upon and require that water quality meets those newer standards. Flushing medications down can have a bearing on that. Yes.
When the water gets pumped into your home, is it already good to drink?
When it gets pumped into the home
Yes.
from a public water system like us, yes. Correct. Yep.
I've heard about this product known as flushable wipes. Are those really flushable? Because I've heard that they're not really flushable. As in, if you flush them down the toilet, they could potentially cause problems for the sewer system. I mean, I know that's not.
I've seen internet stories that allude to what you're talking about. Just that some systems get blocked up by those. So that's a question best asked by the operators of the sanitary sewers.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Yep.
What about, I think it's called Red Eggs?
So that's a product that's used for folks who have on-site sewage disposal systems at their house that maybe have a septic tank.
Oh,
So those are products designed for those applications. Most septic tank operators or owners or contractors will tell you don't use those products, but that's a question for them. All right. You guys want? You take a look at what's over there. And that concludes what we're going to talk about for today.
Thank you. Is it okay if I take a pen? Oh, these are pencils. I assume
you got an annual water quality report, pencil, a brochure on bottled water, and 25 things you can do to prevent water waste.
if you buy bottled water, reuse the bottle.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
At least recycle it, right?
yeah.
Yes, sir.
You can actually reuse the bottle.
How to say that there?
Move out of the way, buddy.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Sorry, me.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that.
I was just getting
You know who
the
started me how to
quality
say yes,
report.
sir, no, sir? My grandpa, he was in the Marine Corps.